Welcome back. So 10 hours of rainfall from yesterday have caused us pretty much to reflect on our choices, on our topography, and the consequences for the future, particularly because those rains, the deluge, came yesterday with some unwholesome consequences. So speaking of solutions, we have joining us on the program this morning to reflect on them, the Lagos governorship candidate in 2023 election and architect, Mr. Gbadebo Rhodes-Vivour. Mr. Rhodes-Vivour.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Okay, so somehow you crept back into the news following your proposal, during the governorship debate last year about the solution to flooding. I'd like to start with that. Does that give you a sense of, righteous, I told them so, and we're here feeling?
No, not really. I mean, even before I get into that, I want to commiserate with the family of Joshua that lost their life in Ikosi, K2, Koshofe local government. The many people that will have to repair their cars in considering this economy, have to change their engines and all sorts. And what is more painful to me is that I see a government that's very in your face and very active when it comes to demolitions. But when you have these kind of things, we don't see any emergency response, we don't see any emergency protocols. We see that same commissioner on Twitter tweeting. We're not seeing men on ground. We're not seeing intelligence being given out early. Avoid these routes. Creating diversions, right? Having roads that operate like a valve system. I mean, if you look at the flooding that happened at the bottom of 3rd Mainland Bridge yesterday, you see the other side of the road was relatively free. And there's this whole idea about you are dumping waste, you are building on canals. But before any building is built, sand filling must happen. And indiscriminate, haphazard sand filling has been happening across Lagos State. Look at Oru, for instance, when you are going up 3rd Mainland Bridge from the mainland, all on your left has been sand filled. I'm not sure if you remember, but there was a time where there was a significant amount of water there. What was the EIA that was done on that sand filling? And is it surprising that water is now pushing back? Because the water doesn't have anywhere to go. You look at places like Ilubirin, the sand filling that happened there and how it's affecting Adeliji. Look at the current sand filling that's going on around Parkview, right? Up until recently, there was on Lagos Lekki-Ekpe Expressway, block 113, I believe, there was a huge green space allocated to that development. All of a sudden now some developer wants to build on it. But this place has been allocated for road expansion and drainage. And the people that live there are fighting and pushing and making a lot of, bringing to our notice that someone wants to develop on something that's been allocated for green space. This development will happen, and then years down the line, someone will come and say, oh, this place was originally allocated for irrigation and green space. So for me, I don't feel a sense of I told you so. I mean, anybody that loves Lagos well enough and has looked at the history of Lagos will see these things coming way before it happens, and which is why it's very painful to always see government pass the buck on the citizens when they have not done any forward thinking or forward planning or showing empathy, right, for the destruction that happens to Lagosians every year.
So I noted that you mentioned a number of areas on the mainland where sand filling is happening, not on the island. And that brings me to the next question, which you've touched a bit on, but I want you to expand upon it. So how much of the flooding that we're currently experiencing is as a result of human conduct as against the impact of climate change, especially because the NIMET had predicted that a number of states will be affected and a number of local government areas will be affected in this year's rains?
I feel that Lagos State has been a coastal, low-lying state for a long time, right? You look at places like the Netherlands, Amsterdam, you look at Japan, the GCAN rain and flooding prevention that they have, right? These are people that have seen that they are prone to flooding, so they've created forward-thinking solutions. The solutions that we've seen with this state government for the last 24 years, because understand they've been in power for 24 years, the same people, has been very pedestrian. It has just being pedestrian. You have your gutters. Okay, don't dump waste in your gutters. Okay, but what is your waste management policy? How have you brought it down to a local government? How have you created incentives for people to manage their waste because it can be converted to wealth? How have you covered your gutters? How have you localize the management of your desilting and your canal management systems? How have you gotten the CDAs involved and local governments involved? You have a situation where local governments are just extension of political parties. They don't have skin in the game. You see that normally gutters are cleared in February, March. This year, we barely saw any of that. So when you see this flooding, you cannot just say citizenry. There's a lot. Lagos State has to take water. You see, the Netherlands and those low-lying states, they have a concept of sponge cities. They have a concept of living with water, not fighting water. You take it very seriously. And that affects your waste management system, that affects your wetland protection policy. That is sacrosanct.
Okay.
Not because you're a governor's friend or you're a friend of the governor, you can Sandfield, but then demolish other people's houses.
Okay. Apparently, there are layers to the solution.
Yes.
So let's start with, as much as possible, the heavy lifting that government has to do. You've talked about it, but posit it rightly for us. So maybe you look at certain areas, what should have been done here? Let's raise the conversation right now.
Yes.
What would have been done differently, say in Oworo?
Yes.
And parts of Lekki where it's now almost a mess.
Yes.
What could have been done?
Yes. Okay, so first of all, we need a wetland protection policy. Wetlands are nature's natural sinkholes, right? And indiscriminate sand filling is pushing water away, and the city is having to deal with it as opposed to the water going out. And this policy must be sacrosanct. Again, like I say, it's not enough for a Lubrine to be sand filled, and then you're talking about somebody building on a canal. The McGregor Canal was built in 1903. This has been reduced and reduced because of people encroaching for decades coming down here. So first, we need a wetland protection policy that is sacrosanct. We also need to address this issue with a forward-thinking mindset, which is we have to bring in innovation. Like I give an example of the GCAN flood protection system in Japan. Huge infiltration systems that can contain water, right, is linked to a pump to pump the water out. And then we start to have, it's not a dam, the word for it is, so a wall by which you can then manage the water outside and the water inside, right? So a whole system that must be brought in to show that there is a forward thinking, because Lagos State is sinking. Lagos State has been listed as one of the cities that will disappear in the next about 60, 70 years in terms of water overflowing. So we cannot just be talking about gutters anymore, right? We need to have a well-managed, mechanized and hydraulic system that's a full body of work, managed with the wetland protection system, and then it then comes down to the people. In terms of waste management, we need to ensure that people are separating their waste from their homes, right? And that separation of waste, you know that, okay, based on this amount of organic waste I've separated, plastic waste I've separated, this is the money I can get back from the state. That way people will now be holding on to their waste as opposed to just dumping it indiscriminately. And lastly, we must ensure that this concretization of everything, right? Because if water cannot go down, that's a problem. We need to have parks, right? We need to have ponds. We need to have water systems that are part of a design. You see how the Oshodi interchange was flooded. I don't know if people have seen that video. Who are we going to blame for that? Did anybody build on a canal in that Oshodi interchange? It cost, from what I remember, it was, the budget for that was between $50 to $70 million. That huge infrastructure, and you're seeing trains waddling through water. So it shows there is no thinking behind an innovative means of getting water out of the city. And that's extremely important for a state like Lagos.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, projections are quite dire, really, particularly when you see that the sea level increases per time, and Lagos is just about 1 meter plus above sea level. In fact, some areas are maybe below sea level. So clearly we need to start acting. In fact, now we're smack in the middle of this. And we've seen the state governments with some activities, and you referenced one of it, demolishing buildings, trying to widen the channels and the rest. But you said something quite important, because you're not just opposition leader, you're also an architect.
Yeah.
So it's taken that you have the expertise and the experience with these sorts of things. So indiscriminate sand filling, and obviously this has been on for decades, clearly. So we've seen buildings come up and people are staying there. In fact, people have forgotten that anything happened. They don't even know the history. So if that has happened for a long time and we need to reverse it, do you then subscribe to demolishing some of these buildings?
I feel that the solution for this now, look at Lagos as it is, then create a channelization of water, right? A lot of these canals are not channeled, right? You have even the one at Odoyalaro, it's not channeled. There is no border, there's no boundary for it, right? So we need to invest in channeling all our canals. And if you have sand filled in a certain place and it's blocking water, we need to have a canal that will go through that place.
So do you mean that leave the house? I'm talking about wetlands now, because you're heavy on that, wetlands that have been sand-filled and concretized. So obviously they can't soak in that water anymore. So are you saying leave those buildings that were built obviously illegally with connivance from people in government? We must say that.
Thank you.
Leave those buildings and then try to find another route, or just do what is meant to be done, right? Allow the water pass through that, and that will mean demolishing those buildings.
I don't subscribe to demolishing
any building.
I don't subscribe to that, because you see, water does not have any need. Channel it to go where it's supposed to go. And I've also talked about bringing in a hydraulic system. The word I was looking for was dikes, right? So you have a dike, you have a water pump, you have that entire system that is pushing water out. So the dike is preventing the water from backflow, right? And you have these paths that are going all through the state, right? And then also then you now have to also then look at other areas that you still have potential for wetland protection and then create it. So you are not demolishing people's houses, because the fact of the matter is this: in Lagos State, people cannot get mortgage to build their houses. People save most of their wealth to be able to buy a house, and just want to demolish it based on your incompetence in the last 24 years.
Encouraging illegality as well.
No, because if the government is complicit in an illegality, that questions the idea of it being illegal, right? If the government is not complicit, then you can talk about illegality. But there is no way a building will go past foundation level and the government is not complicit in it in some way, shape, or form.
So basically leave those buildings.
Leave it and create channels of water that will go through that same site. For instance, I want to see a channel, a wide, about 9 to 10 meters wide channel that will go through Ilubirin, right? Have a dike, have pumps to get water out that's affecting.
What if there's a building
Lagos Island
that is on the right of way of this channelization you're talking? Is it underground you're talking about here, or surface, so that we contextualize it properly?
So for instance, right, you look at a building, right? There's always space around that building, right? So the idea first is, let's prioritize saving the building, but then let's also prioritize having a right of way for the water, right? So we don't just come there and just destroy. You can create a canal and cover it. So if there's a car park, you create a canal, deep canal, right? Cover it, and cars can still park on top of it.
But would there be long-term consequences for the building in question?
So it depends. If you channel the water, right, and ensure that the waterproofing is done, right, all the way down, it should not affect the building structurally, right? It should not affect it structurally. And these are also things that the engineers will have to, that will be part of their priority. We are channeling this thing, we do not want it to structurally affect this building. And then the engineer will give specifications for how that canal is going to be able to be built and how it's going to flow. My point is, there must be a human face to whatever solution we are looking for, because at the end of the day, the government and development is here to serve the people.
But who pays for it?
Now, that is the question. Government has shown itself incompetent in this situation that even allowed for this situation to happen in the first place. For instance, the way Ilubirin is affecting Adenja Delhi, who is responsible for that, right? So it has to be a meeting of the two, right? There must be a coming together to say, listen, we either destroy 5 units of real estate in your place, and this will be the cost of it, or we build a canal here. I, the government, recognize my complicity in this, so I'm going to come in 50%, you come in 50%, and we build it, right? That's the approach I would use. I know that it might not be conventional, but the point is, the government is complicit in this failure. They cannot just go around scot-free. Civil servants that sign these things, people that give planning permission, people that watch, that were supposed to supervise, but did not supervise. And then all of a sudden, the only person that's paying for it are the people that live in that residence. That's not just.
I just want to quickly say that, or ask you, are you willing to work with the state government on this one, the Lagos state government?
I mean, there's nothing I'm saying here that I not prefer in any of the debates that I spoke about.
No, I mean actively, beyond just speaking about it.
Well, for me, you see, I must have faith in a government that has empathy for people and is not so performative. You constantly see the way they try and manipulate on social media or rented accounts, how they try to always put back blame on the people, as opposed to doing forward-thinking work and doing the hard work. You know, I will not tarnish my credibility with a performative set of people. Pretty much, yeah.
You paint a grim picture, and speaking of who should pay for it, perhaps we'll be talking about talking to who should pay for it next. But we'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Gbadebo Rhodes-Vivour, governorship candidate 2023 election, Labour Party in Lagos. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And architect, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.